This is coffee number 5. I'm your host, Lara Schmoisman. Hi, you guys. Welcome back to coffee number 5. My coffee is ready as always. And as always, I have a great guest. Today, I wanted to bring you someone a little different than usual. We talk a lot about brands. We're talking about creating brands, and we talk even about marketing. Well, the brand is created already, or when you have the information what your brand is going to be. Today, I want to bring you Ofer Mintz. Welcome, Ofer. And we want to talk a little more about the research behind a brand and what you need to have a successful brand. So, Ofer, why you don't give us a little backstory about you're in Australia, and thank you so much for waking up early, I believe, to stay with us, to talk to us. And tell us a little more. How did you get to Australia? What do you do? And what your focus is today?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. I'm really glad to talk to you, Laura, about this and your listeners. So I'm a professor, associate professor of marketing at the University of Technology, Sydney. I grew up mostly in the US, but I'm Israeli originally as well. So I've always been interested in startups. I did my PhD in California, University of California, Irvine, and had worked in universities in US and in Israel, and I was actually in Israel last year as well, and back to Australia. So with that different things in terms of research, you get the good thing about academia, you teach a lot, you interact with great students, but then you get to research what you're interested in. And in terms of startups, the Israeli in me is always interested in startups. Okay, so that's,
Yeah.
everybody in Israel is very interested in that. But then also when I've taught, I've always enjoyed students working in startups because what happens is you can teach them things such as I'm teaching MBA students or like advanced master's degrees. And for them, when you're teaching in the big companies, it's hard for them to implement what you're teaching because, there's thousands of employees and it's hard for them to do the individual little
And
thing.
you have a board normally to report to, and there are a lot of voices and a lot of stakeholders.
Right. And so it's just there's a lot of different people. But when you're teaching to startups or people who are working in startups or thinking of new businesses, they're ready to implement, things you're trying to teach them immediately, and they can see the benefit even quicker. So that's kind of the background behind it in terms of kind of my motivation. There's the personal side where I was interested in it, and then I see the teaching side. And then the other last part is just on the research side is what's fascinating is that despite, how important startups are to the world, they're global drivers of economic productivity, job creation, all this. Actually, not that many people talk about the marketing aspect.
Oh, yeah.
So when I'm talking about marketing, not in terms of just, like a Facebook ad, but in terms of understanding your customers, creating a customer-centric company, creating products, who's the product market fit, how do you commercialize, acquire customers, etc. So there's just a lot of areas where it's just less known. So we know companies fail a lot of times, but we don't know
Yeah,
how. Yeah.
I love something else about you and that you didn't mention is that you focus in your research not only into the D2C, also into B2B. Because when we say, let's have startup, everyone thinks about, okay, you're going to have a customer-centric product D2C. Many times your startup is going to be offering services business to business.
Right. And so it's interesting, just kind of the mindset. Usually when you're coming up with these B2B products, it's something that you might have been in the industry even. So you've been maybe working for this company, you realize there's a gap in the market. So
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to say, hey, I can do this, or my team can do this better than what's offered.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're B2C, you're kind of experiencing this and you're like, okay, hey, I like this product. I come up with it. I'm a great user for it. And so that's how you develop it. So there is this little split on even how origins of startups.
But there are also brands that they can have both. And I have some of as a client that I work in the beauty industry, and we have the part of this direct to consumer, but also we have the part that is to other doctor offices, spas, and that's the business business. So, and you have to have a completely different marketing strategy for those.
Yes, and indeed. And on top of that, sometimes even if you're selling to a B2B, you need to sell to the end customers as well, right? So
Mhm.
think about even like you're selling to sell to a retailer who then sells it to customers. So you have to have this kind of dual mindset as well. So this is where one of the big challenges is for startups, right?
Yes.
In younger companies, and even I have to say even mature companies when they're coming up with new products is who are your target customers? People often over focus on that one singular one without thinking of the entire kind of ecosystem, how you have to support.
Yeah, well, but you just mentioned about they don't think about the marketing. What do you mean by that?
So let's just start with the basics. Okay, so
Okay.
there's different aspects. It's a really good question. So the first is just the very beginning of a company should be, what problem is your business trying to solve? What customer problem is your business trying to solve? And I'd like to take credit for that, but it's really an Amazon saying. Okay,
Yes.
so Amazon says that, but in essence, that's the number one thing of an entire business. What customer problem are you trying to solve? Okay. And a lot of times companies cannot answer that. And that's already like a red flag. So, for example, I've been asked before, what's the one question I would ask any startup, ignoring the marketing part? And I say this. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's step one. Who's your customer? What are you trying to solve? So you're understanding their pain points. And then you're building this up. Okay. What kind of products are they interested? What kind of things are our competitors offering? And where's that market fit? And then after that, you got to figure out also, how do I then reach out to my customers? So they got to know about us. They got to be convinced to try our products. They got to enjoy it. They got to retain it. And then how can you grow exponentially by basically leveraging your current customers as well?
Yeah, but also there are a few things that there you make it really fast, and it doesn't happen that fast normally for brands. But also, it also takes money.
Yeah. It takes
So
time, and also time. Time and
time,
effort is the other,
yes.
right?
So
So if you're doing things like this, it's hard to even, you're talking to your customers, for example, it's instead of developing a product, right? So you're having your time allocation is really challenging.
yeah, one of the things that I've been seeing over and over with clients and early stage clients is not thinking about who is their client and what's their client's problem. When they're trying to think about the brand, they think about the brand themselves, the brand personality, the brand voice, which is great. And having a logo, a beautiful colors, incredible social media. They even pay for influencers, but it's not clear what's their customer problem, and they are not understanding the customer journey. One of the things that also I noticed that many people go, let's go and find new clients constantly, but they forget about the customer and retention, and they need to be a plan for that as well.
So yeah, so those are two very important kind of separate, well, the related issues, but we'll talk, we can split them up. But the first is in terms of, yeah, a lot of times this happens, especially on B2C side. You develop what you think is the best product out there, okay? And so like academic talk and science talk, they call it the best mousetrap. So it's like, an
Yeah.
old term, like we created the fanciest mousetrap out there. Okay, but one of the problems is that you really need to talk to your customers and see, okay, what things do they like? What do they need this for? Okay, so these are the starting points of your business. And then on top of that, how do you get their attention? Right? And so on the B2B side, you might have a more of a connection, but even then, how do they buy products from other companies? And so you have to understand this kind of the sales mentality as well. So how do you develop the product? How do you then sell the product? And these are, of course, different stages, and it requires that time and effort, which is very difficult for early stage companies because if you're doing that, you're not doing something else, and you're trying to make some money, right?
Yeah,
Some
well,
money
that's why
back.
you need to hire an agency like us. So you can do, that's what I always say, that that founders, they're spending so much money in doing the same things themselves without having the expertise to do it, that end up paying a higher price tag.
So on that note too, so just combining these two things as well, not just on the product development side, but when you're trying to sell as well, what you mentioned amazingly, Laura, was about the retention because
Mm-hmm.
your customers are sales agents as well, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the way you growth hack and the way you build up a huge business is through your current customers. So
Yeah.
these incentives that you provide them to also, first of all, you have to, of course, have a good product and make them happy, but then you want to basically make them part of your team in a way that incentivizes them to speak on your behalf as
Yeah,
well.
you want to create a community, and there is no better marketing than word of mouth.
Right. And so there's been a lot of them. Like Hotmail was like this. Okay, so I've had conversations with one of the founders of Hotmail who told me he invented the word viral marketing. And I looked on
Uh-huh.
Wikipedia and I guess it said he is, okay. But he was talking about that was one of the main things is you're using your current customers. Okay. And Dropbox used the same thing. They used incentives. Again, they basically gave people more space on their hard drives, or sorry, their, on the cloud systems
Systems.
to to incentivize them. And there's many other examples such as this that in essence you're using them to grow. And that the key here is that you're using them to grow to a next level. And just kind of one other thing, just bringing it back to about the how to do the marketing as well, and challenges. So one of my research, we got data from an online evaluator called Equidam, and that company basically startups who are just curious about their valuations went to this website, put in a lot of information about them, and got a valuation. Okay. And so I was able to access this information, not just their valuations, but the information they put in, except for the company names, which was private. Okay. And so what we looked at is we found that in the early stage, okay, that early stage B2C firms are more likely to do marketing, but
Mm-hmm.
they're not doing it right. And so actually their
Ah,
valuation ended up being worse from doing
uh-huh.
this marketing. And the opposite was happening with the early B2B, where they were not doing it, right? They were less likely to do marketing in
Yes,
general. And there's a broad definition of this, but any way we classified it, they were just less likely to do types of marketing. But this was much more effective for them. So those early B2B who were doing marketing were much more successful, but there were just few of them. And the early B2C were more likely to do it, but less successful.
exactly, because they do it mostly without strategy, and marketing without strategy is like tripping on your shoelaces, basically. It's going for a walk
So
with your shoelaces
yeah.
untied.
So it's a very good one. So I interviewed something like 20, something 25, uh, different startup founders, but also investors, VCs, all along the board. And I remember one startup consultant said that basically early B to C, a lot of times they run a Facebook ad of poor quality. It doesn't get them the results, and they say, we're done with marketing.
Exactly.
Okay. And that's because they didn't think of the other steps involved. So they run a bad quality, it takes away their resources, takes away their money, and it doesn't lead to the outcome they want, so they get
I
frustrated.
consult businesses several times a day. I talk to new businesses, and I see the consistent problem is everyone tried a form of marketing, but
Mhm.
nobody tried it consistently. Marketing is not something that you can stop. You need to start and do it well, and then read the metrics. Because sometimes, first of all, you learn so much from the metrics, but also you see what works and what doesn't work. But there are many ways to have conversion, but you have to have a plan for that. Maybe your conversion, you cannot expect that someone will come in from an ad to your website and open and buy the first time. That's
Right.
crazy talk. And
So
so
no, yeah.
so so the conversion can be, is the person giving you an email address? Is giving you a phone number? Are you giving them an incentive to become a customer? Where is your brand awareness? Who is using your product? Like nobody will, I have a few cases of brands that the only ones creating social proof were the owners of the brand. I won't
Hmm.
trust as a social proof. Of course, you're the owner of the brand and you're going to talk well about your brand.
Right. And so this is a big challenge. So first of all, you made me smile because my main research prior to even startups was on metrics, and I'm writing a book on digital marketing analytics about the metric trail and how you have to think through your strategy. And this is more on the digital side, but
Yeah.
it's a class I've taught basically for 15 years since social media was really catching on. And so I had to create all my own content and stuff. So, but the metrics are critical because you have to have these indicators, what you're doing well, and more importantly, what you're not doing well, right? And so you don't take it as a lesson, I should stop, but you should basically take it as a lesson, is this is things I need to fix.
But sometimes it's also not even what you did right or wrong. Maybe there was an algorithm change. And if you don't know that, you don't know what you're measuring.
Yeah, and it's a huge deal. And also the measurement itself, right? Sometimes it takes longer, right? And
Yeah.
so these are long effects. And so you can think about just even things that you should be measuring too. So for example, in this book I'm writing, I talk about like five major metrics that you should be using. So one is just the simple awareness. how
Yes.
people are aware of it, right? And that's just the starting point. There's a lot of flaws with this, okay? But you do need to know how many people know about you, right? So if you're a new brand, new startup, that's your main challenge is no one knows about you, right?
Yeah. It's all about brand awareness and brand recognition.
Right. And then the second one is then it gets into conversions, right?
Mhm.
You get into that kind of the actual sale. So the first part, the awareness is to acquire customers. The
Mhm.
second is that you're actually you're retaining them or converting them. And then the third one is this willingness to recommend. And you can think about that promoter score, but willingness to recommend is just a simpler version. And it's in essence, how satisfied and willing to retain are they? And that's really critical. So these are important things to then measure because this is a great indicator of how much people are liking your product and are they willing to go out on a limb for your product to tell others. So
In that case, having a subscription, if you say a D2C, you can have a subscription model for retention.
right, and so it's perfect. And then on top of that, you can then try to add these, facilitate these basic growth hacking that they will do referrals for you, right? So
Yeah.
if they do referrals, so if their willingness to recommend, then they'll be doing the referrals, and then you can grow your brand out more. And just as I talked to one venture capitalist, one of the leading people in Australia, and I was asking him about his investment strategy, and he said the only thing they look at is customer devotion. Customer devotion. I was like, I asked him to explain it a little bit more, but in essence, how much are those customers going, using your product slash willing to talk to everybody else about it?
Yeah.
And he's
It's
like, if you
about,
don't have that, it's not as important to
well,
us.
it's the same about talking to a brand. Actually, I was talking today to a brand that they have no reviews. They have zero reviews of their product. How are you going to be converting if people are not talking about your products? It's one of the first thing you see. Like even you go to Amazon and the first thing you know, if you don't know the product, you're going to go for the reviews.
But there is a challenge, right? So I completely agree. This is one of the things, and I'm looking at this in some research. I've been looking at different websites and startups and trying to build out, how effective are these, not just reviews, but testimonials. Testimonials is a key one as well. But the challenge for companies is they feel awkward asking for this, right? And
Yes.
so you feel like, I mean, I always like, in terms of just my teaching, it's not like I want to go with my students and be like, hey, review me well, right? That's very awkward. It's not a conversation. I think actually in my case, it's illegal. But in
Yeah.
essence, I don't want to ask people to
Well,
say,
in Amazon,
right?
you cannot ask people either, but there are other ways to do it. There is a gentle ways to nudge people in having reviews, or like you can, I mean, there are a lot of flows for that. And there is ways and ways to say it. Or also there are a lot of programs like refer a friend and you get $10 off and your friend gets $10 off.
Right. And so actually I wrote a book right after during like it was during COVID, but it ended as well.
Yeah,
And so I looked at these
I
different
read
things in terms
it.
of, thank you so much. It was on basically post-pandemic business strategies. Okay.
Yes.
And it was a customer-centric lens. And one of the examples was about the referral marketing. And so the company was here in Australia and it was about sleepy toys for babies. And this company was basically a couple moms who were just who are doing this and realize, we have this good product to help kids go to sleep. And they built their entire organization, basically referral marketing, encouraging these moms it was mostly moms, okay, to share basically to all their friends that, hey, this is a good tool. They share it with their play groups, etc. And their business just boomed from this. And the support part was then they had like a communications, in terms of if you had like support, customer support, they tried to talk, direct with those women in terms of like how they would use that language. So it was very casual because they
Mhm.
understood their customer. They really understood their customer and they were trying to build that trust and connections. And then they realized that by these referrals, they were part of the team too. So now you go on your limb that, hey, I want to promote this, that now you're part of their team too, because now you have a little bit at stake as well.
Yeah.
So these are other ways of doing it as well, because to get out that challenge of just bluntly asking, hey, can you review me?
I was very interested in something you mentioned before about the part of business to business. That is a completely different strategy. And many times you need to present in shows. You need to be, you have to have other points of contact with your industry leaders. But sometimes it's challenging for the companies to decide where they need to go. Because sometimes where they need to go is outside the box, not where all your competition is.
So this is where it's really important for you to understand your customers, who's making those decisions. So the other part about it too is B2B is very personal. It feels very personal to sell your
Mhm.
products because B2C, you're kind of, you can post it online and you're not as engaged with those customers. Whereas B2B, a lot of times you're going to your friends, you're going to your contacts first, being like, this is how I created the product, so I think this is the flow. So there's that extra personal where you have that pressure that you're nervous, right? And so one of the things is sometimes you wait maybe too much to have that, a perfect product versus a very good product because of that personal stake in terms of, everyone in startups has this problem where, you're obviously running out of cash, but B2B side, you have also that personal reputation. Okay. So
Yeah,
then
but
how do you
also
decide on it? Yeah.
In B2B, it's very important how you adapt your language and how your narrative, how you communicate, because you're not communicating necessarily for an audience. You normally communicating with a lot more educated audience in your space.
So they're very knowledgeable, and you have to understand there's different segments too. So the people who might use your product or might be maybe not the decision makers, but they could be the influencers. So you can think about it that way is like who are the users of your product for a B2B? Who are the influencers in terms of making the decision? And then who actually is the decider? Okay, so that's kind of one of the first things to do. And in, B2B, it'll depend on your product exactly, but you should try to target obviously all three, right? And so you have a limited budget, but how are you going to develop it is a challenge. But that's where this market research goes into and basically talk to people starting off, hire an agency, etc. But you need to have that understanding of who's that decision maker and how do you reach them. So trade shows
And
are great because people are there, but it's hard also to reach that decision maker sometimes.
no, but also I always say trade shows are great, but the follow-up of the trade shows is a lot more important.
Yes, that's a good one because you get the really good, you get leads,
Yeah,
and the other part about a B2B is sometimes your sales are so big that you really don't, the success rate can be much lower, right?
but
You can have a 1 to
also you need
2%
to know,
conversion.
is your company ready for that?
Yes.
The company, can you deliver those big sales? Because then you spend a lot of money in these trade shows because trade shows are not cheap. And normally you need to travel with a team, you have to have a setup. It has a huge impact in your budget. And are you ready to deliver if you get an order? That's my question.
That's a
In each market, there are different entry level places, and I always think that is I would be scared to go and work with a big retailer at the beginning. You need to have proof of concept, and also because this is very linked to operations. Do you have the operations set up to deliver?
so this is absolutely correct. So kind of tying this to some of my research too. So I've been embedded with an angel network here in Australia for a couple of years. So I've got access to basically their decision making documents when startups apply, like meeting notes, due diligence process, all this, and the individual emails as well.
Mhm.
And one of the things they look at is this ability to scale. So can you scale? So let's say, basically, as you mentioned, you need the social proof, you need customer validation, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But let's say you get this order, can you ramp up rapidly? And they look at this as one of their decision points. And if the answer is no, you don't even enter the consideration set. You're gone at that point because they realize that's how you're going to make the money, right? Is that making that efficiency. So when you go to this trade show, you get this leads, you have to reach out to all the leads, you have to have this good customer relationships with them because you also don't know what will happen down the line. And then, yeah, can you deliver? And if you fail to deliver at that point, it's kind of hard. It's
Uh,
a catastrophic for companies.
Absolutely. And I would like to ask you your take on influencer marketing. What do you
So it depends. So okay, so it's a very broad area, right? So it just depends what you're interested in, right? So influencers. Okay, so let's take the B2C side. Like if you're in like a hedonic, like a product that in terms of customers enjoy, then influencers is typically more successful. Okay.
Mhm.
For B2B side though, what's interesting is people don't think about it because you think about influencers are like, like the Kim Kardashians of the world, but there
Mhm.
are influencers in terms of companies and in terms of, in their industry. So my students, I always say like I probably am an influencer of what you'll do in business in terms of digital marketing, for example,
Mhm.
because that's my area. You're taking my class and you're listening to me. So you don't always have to go for the influencer who's flashy, right? There's also like micro influencers, there's lower level, but really is, does that influencer get to those decision makers? Okay,
But
especially in the B2B
yes,
space.
but also is what do you think that the perception of the consumer is with the influencers that now they need to show that this is sponsored content because they got paid for it? What is the perception from the final consumer?
So it's interesting with influencers because, I think people have always known they were getting paid. And so they're kind of customers are overlooking that anyways. Okay. So they are seeing it, but I think overall there's a tendency kind of to discount it. So it has to be in a more organic way in terms of, not just a straight promotion, but you have to see them doing something with it that they enjoy to build that trust.
Well,
Because in
there's
reality, you're just using it for trust anyways, right?
yes, there's this evolution now of social content that I believe TikTok brought to us. And now that is with, I mean, you're in Australia, so probably you're not talking about this much lately, but we have TikTok Shop in the US that is social content posted by an influencer, and then they get a rev share on the sale. How do you
Yeah.
think that this
So
is a game changer for the
I
industry?
think it's a I think it's a very important, and I mean, it hurts, for example, Facebook and different companies that way. But in terms of just, I think it's a really good option for companies. But again, you have to know your customer as well. Like it's good for awareness. It's hard to drive that into sales, and this is where you need the metrics to measure, is this effective? Because in the end, the influencer is almost like a choice of where your actual marketing communications strategy is. Where are your customers? Does this really matter to them?
Mhm.
And so the choice of even the type of influencers and all that will go into, how does your audience make the decision? How do your customers make that decision? Will it influence them? And so you're hoping influencers do influence, right? But it's kind of a challenge in that sometimes companies over rely on this,
Mhm.
whereas there's other methods that could be more effective. And I think for younger companies, especially, that the basically using your own customers as the referrals is usually the best way because they think it's authentic at that point.
How important it is, because I know for me, but I would like to have your thoughts on this. It's important to have an omni-channel strategy.
Oh, it's critical, right? And so this is again a challenge for especially for new businesses because how much can you do on your own and manage this? But basically now customers are everywhere using everything. And they think about the last time you purchased, let's say you went on a trip, how you researched, things on your phone, on your laptop, on your tablet. So
Yeah.
then you maybe go to a store, you see some advertising. Right. So it's basically all these different things that influence you at different aspects. And that's where you kind of knowing again that customer journey, the customer progression, what makes people, where, how do you then push them down the funnel to decide and purchase your exact product. And so the omni-channel is very important because of that. You're basically going to where your customers are, which is a very important, key marketing thing.
Absolutely. At the same time, I believe that it can save you money being on omni-channel. Like, for example, if you put your efforts on SEO, you're going to get a lot more organic traffic than and having to put all your traffic in pay media.
Right. And sometimes you need to do a little, and the point about omnichannel is you should do both, right? And you should do it in
Exactly.
different ways, right? So you do a little bit of paid, kind of skip kind of
Yeah, exactly.
leapfrog in the rankings, but you need to have the generic and the SEO and other elements as well.
Yeah, and I do believe I'm a email marketing believer, SMS marketing. Those things really help to create that connection with your your user.
Yeah. So I think that, you can think about it as the email and SMS are really important for the containing the satisfying and retaining those customers, right? You want to develop that nice connection, the emotional connection, and then kind of enhance that relationship going forward.
Yes, but also there are strategies that then you can use to retarget those customers if you have the information. The information is power, and with that information, you can reuse it to feed them or to find them in other places.
Right, yes, very, very well stated. And what companies need to think about too, so I completely agree of using the SMS and email. And again, but think about your customers. So you don't want to overload them as well. So you have to fine tune. This is where you need to really, again, talk to your customers. How many emails do you want, right? Because the one thing you don't want to do as a company is over email as well. So but you don't want to under email so they don't
Yeah,
know.
there's a
So it's
balance,
fine line.
and also depends of the time of the year, but also goes along with the strategy. And for example, when you send emails, you don't send emails to everyone. That's why we create segments. And you need to create, it's all based on the strategy that you have. It's not that easy
Right.
to put that strategy.
No, and that's where at the beginning you have that segmentation, the targeting and positioning of the customers as well. So you're coming up with that plan based off your customers. You're developing different segments. You have different loyalty bases as well.
Yeah.
And so one mistake companies often do though, when they do come up with these strategies, they overdo about demographics. So they over segment, for example, let's say men versus women. Okay. Whereas the more effective things are just like how often do they use the product, right? You can tell a lot more about that. How often are they purchasing? Okay. Um, you can have different parts about, their interests, where it's much more effective than demographics.
But also, I think it's not important also to understand who is your customer, and not all your customers are going to be customer for the same product. So what customer buys what? And then you can tell the patterns of if this person buys this, okay, maybe I can remind them every few months that they will need it again, or I can remind them that they have an extra discount if they haven't, or we can suggest another product that it goes really well with that.
And exactly, and this goes into something you mentioned a lot earlier, Laura, which is like your current customers, right? Because I've talked to some very successful companies that, were at one point like very new, and then they've hit that really scaled up version. And one thing they kept focusing on was those new customers. And I started asking, for example, they thought that their products were like a one-time use. And so they kept growing by one-time users. I was like, wait, you have an entire market of users who you're not going back to. And so think about those possibilities of reconnecting with them,
Yeah,
having offers and different things like that, where while they were doing amazing, they could have done so much more at that point
yeah. One of
using the
the
investment they
worst
have.
thing that you can do is abandon your customer. You have a customer and you stop sending them emails, they will forget about you.
Yeah. No, definitely. And again, there's always that fine line, how much you email or how much you do an SMS, but the key is that you want to do it in effective ways, right? So you had to have this emotional connection with them that they like your company, especially if you're new, you can sell your story. A lot of
Mhm.
times is very important. And then they make them feel part of the team kind of thing, right? And then they get involved, and then you can, keep
Yeah.
trying to say, okay, here's how we're doing what we're doing to help you and help us grow as well.
I have another question for you that you mentioned before, that you are talking with a lot of angel or equity firms.
Yeah.
And what is more important when you think that you pitch to someone to get money? Is about the brand story, your consumer story? What are because you're not going to get the attention of a lot of attention. You need to hook them. What's a way to hook an investor?
So I basically developed this model, and it's got to go for the review process. And academics takes, 5 years or something for the review process. So by the time it actually comes out, it might be a little bit different. But what I call is a triple check validation. So investors basically look at three big picture things. Okay, first is they screen startups out based off what I call business validation. Okay. And basically, it's a lot of different components, but in essence, do you have a credible business? That's what they're looking at. Okay. So, for example, I mean, obviously, does your product, will it work? You have is your IP protected? But then it gets into things like understanding your customer. Do you have a commercialization strategy? Okay. What's your branding strategy, et cetera? Okay. So, there's a lot of different elements. So, if you don't have that, they're not even going to you might get to
Well,
due
but
diligence, but
I
they'll kind
cannot
of knock
tell
you out.
you how many brands I can come to me and say, well, we are raising money. I say, but how do you raise money when you don't have your marketing in place?
And so let me get to the second part, which is okay. So if you don't have marketing, you're not going to get to that second part. Now you have to have a minimum, right? So in
Mhm.
terms of you have to have these ideas, what's your value proposition? How are you unique versus your competitors, the customer, the acquisition strategy?
Mhm.
And really the key one though, so that's the first one's that business validation. Then you get to the second stage where you're that final investment decision is basically a combination of customer validation, okay, which is do you have purchases? Okay. And not just that, are your customers satisfied? So you need to have evidence
How
of,
many purchases it will
yep,
satisfy? Because let me tell you another story. I'm all about storytelling today.
yep.
And I've been talking to someone who has a startup, and she told me, I sold 60. And that's great. Who did you sell to? And well, friends and family. No, you didn't sell 50. Those are not
Yeah.
your consumers. We don't even know who your consumers are.
And so this is so there's no set number because it also can change for B2B versus B2C, but it needs to be the evidence that you consistently can sell. Let's put it this way.
Mhm.
And if sometimes companies are not at that stage, so you can have negotiations with a very prominent customer, which is really hard to do, but like giant change. But that can kind of jumpstart your process. But when you get that, basically what I found is you're guaranteed if you have that business validation, okay, and you
Mhm.
can prove this customer validation again with positive reviews, not negative. If they reach out to the customers and they say, it's kind of or they reach out to an expert in that industry and say, I don't know what this means, then you're doomed. Okay. But if you have positive, then you have a very high likelihood of getting seed funding. So in the one I observed, I had a small sample because I was able to get these details and angel investors they don't invest in too many, but out of these companies, everyone, and again, a small sample in terms of like 21 companies, but the ones that had the customer validation and the business all got seed funding. Okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then the last part is, do you have other investors who are interested? And so that can help amplify the seed funding round as well. But really, the key part is make sure you're competent in different areas. Okay, so I've developed this checklist and key questions asked. Okay, about all these different aspects. Okay, that this is what companies are what angels are looking for, and this is also what companies need to have. But then you have to have that customer validation. That's really critical. And without that, if you don't have the customer validation, they're very hesitant to give you funding. And so you can think about we've all heard of like, these big open like generative AI firms and all this AI which don't have as much customers. But for them, they have a lot of prominent customers or they have some kind of connection. For most businesses, okay, the vast majority, this is where you have to have that customer validation to succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. And also you have to have all your paperwork in place. Make sure that your taxes, you align right, your company is set up correctly. Otherwise, they're gonna be asking you for all that.
They're looking, and one surprising thing also from just that research, by the way. So you have all these different things, again, the IP protection that you can scale up. You have a good growing market. There's different aspects in this business validation. But one thing that's less concerning to them is actually your valuation. And so they don't get in too many arguments with companies. There's like a set range in essence. So I think they kind of know. And what they look at is, okay, if you don't have customer validation, we're not giving you your full seed fund. We'll just give you a bridge round to grow a little bit more, try, either to develop your product more and to get those customers. But in essence, without that customer validation, you're stopping yourself. So in the sample I saw, they basically would give companies like $100,000 if they didn't have customer validation. But if you have customer validation, you're getting the 300 to a million in terms of
But
just the seed funding. Yeah.
let me ask you a question. And so if these companies when they give you this budget, what they give it based on to use for what? Because I've been hearing over and over, I wish I would have more money for marketing.
So it's a very important one. And so to scale up, you have to have marketing. And so I think one of the key things that I found is even going to the companies, having a marketer helps. And not just someone who does, let's say, the Facebook ads or whatever, someone who really understands the nuances in terms of like understanding the customers, the developing the value proposition. So building from the ground up and the sales. So both. And so just as a side, as a different research project, we tested out what founder backgrounds are most likely to get funding. And so there's almost always a scientist. So kind of ignore that one for a second because they're on the
Okay.
team no matter what. But when you have a scientist and a marketer, your odds shoot up it was almost double the amount if you had a marketer and a scientist than compared to a different background, like a scientist and some other one.
Oh,
And so
I should
so
go
you
start
have that. And
asking
if you
for
have
more money.
three, and if you have three people, the third person to add is a financier, by the way. So then if you have a marketer, scientist, and finance, then you're really set.
Well,
And so
that's good to know. Well, thank you, Ofer, so much for being here today and for having early coffee with me.
I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me, and I
Uh,
hope enjoys it.
Yeah,
Take care.
well, I mean, and for you guys, I hope that you got a lot of data today. This is unusual, so take everything, and I'm sure we're gonna get more information in the chapter notes about Ofer and how to reach to him. But thank you so much again, and I'll see you guys next week with more coffee number 5.
Find everything you need at laraschmoisman.com or in the episode notes right below. Don't forget to subscribe.
It was so good to have you here today. See you next time. Catch you on the flip side. Ciao, ciao.